and I know you talk about this a lot of times, I'm sure you do in your coaching all the time, but it's the why. And that why ebbs and flows over time. And there's seasons of life and that why changes. But it's important, I think, sometimes to take the time to step back and check that. I mean, there's a thing that always sticks out to me that you can relate with, and some people maybe that were in our fraternity over time, but there was an article called Man in the Glass, and it's basically looking yourself in the mirror, and that one's always stuck with me. Do you like the reflection that you see? Are you proud of what you're doing? Are you making an impact? You've got to answer to the man in the glass, more or less, and that's one that's always been at the front of my mind, but that's a little selfish. I should have done that about the woman stand beside the man in the glass a little bit and said, what are your needs? And am I fulfilling them? I'm trying to be a provider, but because I'm a man and that's what I know, but do you need emotional support that prior to having Parker, I was pretty hardened about? It was like, your dad and my dad come from the same era and kind of were the same way. Put your head down and work your ass off.
Right. Welcome to The Roll Call, the podcast where we dive into the roles that define us. I'm your host, John Glahn. On each episode, we explore the journeys of people discovering their true roles in life, business, and beyond. Get ready for inspiring conversations about finding purpose and authenticity. Let's roll the roll call. Welcome to The Roll Call. I'm your host, John Glahn. I have with me a longtime friend from my hometown, Nate Scherer. And as a part of my kind of tour back in Indiana, another friend of mine who, again, grew up with, went to Purdue with. We happened to have another connection. We were in a fraternity together. Yep. And then life happens, and go back and look and see what people are doing. And I've admired, and we're going to introduce him as a serial entrepreneur, because we were just talking like, what are we going with here? But you know what? So many different things to do, benefiting community, et cetera. It's going to be an awesome conversation. So we're all here in a count of four. Welcome to The Roll Call.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and catch up and just talk about the cool things that have happened over 20 years that feels like it's been 5 minutes. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't want to break from the normal thing that I do. So we're just going to start with how'd you get here? And there's going to be lots of twists and turns that we're going to pull towards. But again, I know similarly we started in the corporate world and we decided we had better things to do. So lay it on us.
Yeah, I mean, really for me, you think you're programmed, I think a little bit when you go to college, like go to all these job fairs and find the biggest company that you can with the nameplate that everybody recognizes and dive in, get in there if you can. And so I kind of fell into that trap a little bit and, quickly learned that this is not the box that I like to play in. And, heard some no's a lot of times, or this is just the way that we do things a number of times. And I knew in my heart at some point I was going to have my own business. So very quickly, some opportunities presented themselves, and that's kind of the direction I chose to go for my life.
Yeah. So let's start with what because most of it's about seeing an opportunity and doing something about it.
Sure.
So we were just kind of getting into it. I'm like, you know what? Nope. We're gonna talk about this here. So what actually did get you? You said you always knew you were going to be one,
right?
But what was the catalyst?
Yeah. I mean, really growing up, I mean, we're from the same community, so you understand. I mean, there's a lot of, it's seasonal, there's not a lot of great opportunities where we're from. But my parents were entrepreneurs, and I grew up with friends that had parents that were entrepreneurs. So for me, it was fairly normal. Didn't really know what that meant though. It seemed like a little bit of an enigma. How can I do this, or what does it look like? So that's where the corporate route, seemed like the path of least resistance. But I think that was really what was the catalyst. It's like, all right, I tried this, but I thought that I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and this isn't really tripping my trigger, so I need to go a different direction. And my parents had a business where they were serving a marine OEM boat builder, and they needed some supply chain help, and I wanted to fill that gap for them. And that's kind of how it started. And it was a great opportunity for me to move back to my community and be around water, which I love, and settle down and create some roots. And it was a very interesting journey. I mean, it's something that I had never done before. Really was the first manufacturing job I ever had. And to this day, it's the only manufacturing job I ever had. And I never planned on knowing, how to do a lot of the things that I know today.
Yeah. I want to back up to, because this is a good, I think, lesson. Well, one, I didn't know the word entrepreneur, by the way, back. I was just a business owner. It's the only word I knew way back when, right? Let alone entrepreneur. Because my dad was a business owner too, but I would not qualify that as entrepreneur. And, as far as it was a job.
Right.
Right. So back to the need that came from why you actually did start. Because you said some words earlier before we were talking, and your dad had a need, and you said, "Why don't you do that?" So go run through that story a little closer.
Yeah, I mean, really, what the nuts and bolts of it were was he did the end of the operation, the finish work on the products, and the suppliers that he was having weren't doing a real great job at what they were doing, so it was leaving him with more work and varying levels of complexity all the time because they weren't consistent. These weren't high volume, stamp out millions of parts a year and Lean Six Sigma it out. And it wasn't that kind of work. And so it was really frustrating for him because he couldn't control his costs, therefore he couldn't control his profit. And he was just frustrated. And that's where the opportunity was, and fortunately, I was young enough and smart enough to be able to recognize what an opportunity looked like. And it was a lot of, I can't do this or I don't want to do that. And it was like, okay, well, if you don't want to do it and you have a need, then that's an opportunity. So I pressed him a little bit and said, hey, I'd be interested in that. How do I get started? Or well, you need to know this, this, and this. So I'd go home back to Ohio where I lived at the time, and I would go to work all day, and all night I would research these things and figure it out, and then come back because this was summertime. So I'd go back to the lake and spend time on the lake and say, hey, this is what I learned this week. Now what do I need to know? And we wash, rinse, repeated that throughout the summer. Wow. And it got to a point, and he said, I guess at this point, got to find a building. And I thought, well, how hard can that be? But it was a time when, we lived in an RV intensive area. And at that point in time, RV was pumping and really hard to find buildings. And that proved to be a little bit more challenging than I thought. But we finally found one, and I moved back and started the business and hit the ground running. But there was a lot of pieces and parts that I had no idea about. And, entrepreneurs, they say you build the plane as it's flying. And that's pretty true.
Yeah. So going from knowing nothing about it to seeing a need, immersing yourself in it, and then coming back and just doing it. So how long ago was that?
2004. Yeah.
And then, wow, it seems like just a few years later, there was a downturn in the world. So
yeah, pretty fast. There was a couple. Yeah. I think there was a pretty healthy dip in 2005 that was impactful, and we weathered that storm okay. And then 2008, it was almost like it shut off like that. Yeah. I don't remember the exact date, but I can tell you it was in September, and it was like everything stopped. Orders stopped, phones stopped ringing, and it was like, what are we doing? Everybody's like, I don't know. Yeah. And it was buckle down and hang on, and there's a lot of strategy that had to happen at that point. And how do you try and weather the storm? But we had no control. I mean, nobody did at that point. And hopefully I never see an event like that again, because it was pretty unsettling.
Yeah, I was going to say most of us saw that again in 2020, but if you're in the, if you're supplying to the boating industry, oddly enough, that's weird. It kind of blew up, didn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely did. And it was totally unexpected. I saw a run up from 2016, 17, 18, 19. And in our area, it was tough because unemployment rates were under 2%. You could not get people. We grew up in an area where if you're working in the RV industry, that's why I always tell people, I live in Syracuse, Indiana. You can go 12 minutes south and have a master's degree at that time and make $80,000 a year. Yeah. Or you can go have an 8th grade education, go north of here and drive a fork truck and make $80,000 a year. So if you're in between those two areas, it's hard to get workforce. Yeah. And a lot of people don't understand that about that area. But going into the recession, it looked bad, and there was no understanding what was going to happen. And I don't think anybody really forecasted the fact that it was going to push people outdoors and people were going to be clamoring for water and remoteness and those kinds of products. And ironically enough, I sold my company on the Friday before our governor closed our state down. So we closed on that Friday before. So it was a pretty interesting run up to that point in the first half of 2020 for me.
Oh, wow. And then, and if this is too much, we can say no. But was it a sale where you're walking away, or were you still a part of the? Did you have to stick and see it through?
Sure. No, I mean, I think what you're asking is, was I required to stay on an employment agreement? Yeah, that was the plan. Yeah, the plan was definitely, we want you on this team. That was really what the CEO said when he called me on the Wednesday before. He called me on Wednesday and he said, "Hey, Nate, how you feeling?" I said, "This is getting pretty intense. I'm not sure what's going on in the world." He said, "I'm not either." He said, "But how do you feel?" I said, "Well, I feel like I've been running a marathon for, at that point, like 17 years, and I can see the finish line, and I don't know if I got the legs to get over the line." Yeah. He said, "Well, don't worry about us. We're going to get this deal on Friday. We want you on the team." And I thought, wow, That's
Wow.
pretty impressive from an acquirer to say
Yeah.
in the midst of all this. And he also said, he goes, but if it were next week, I don't know if I could tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
So I felt really good about that. And that
Wow.
made me feel good, not knowing that, that following Monday that they were going to announce they were going to close our state down.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting time. And then the following year, there was only about a 3-4 week period where that part of the country really felt any COVID impact.
Yeah.
Everybody was trying to jockey and understand, can I work? Are we essential? Is a boat essential? And then all of a sudden, one company felt like their legal team found that they were essential, and then all the dominoes fell right behind it. And then from then on, it, even until about last year and a half, it was gangbusters for that industry.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so that was definitely saw a need, and not many people get to an exit, which is great. What have you been doing since?
Yeah, I mean, really at that point for me, when I had decided to entertain the sale and started thinking about that, a lot of that was kind of motivated by the fact that there's some complexities in the market. There was need for roll-up. And so it was a good point. We sold to an acquirer, and they buy and hold and serve the industry. So I thought that was a good move.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that there was a lot of opportunity for people to come in, and there was maybe a race to the bottom would happen at some point for me and the products that we made. So that wasn't overly attractive. At that point, my kids were starting to get a little bit older, and I coached a lot of their sports and found a lot of pride and satisfaction in seeing them grow and be able to do things that 2 or 3 years they weren't able to do, and started asking me more questions about what I was doing and what interest I had. And so I could see that there was some of those maybe entrepreneurial sparks in them. So it was really an opportunity for me to step back and say, if I walk away from this and I've got a little bit more financial freedom and a little bit more freedom of my time, what is it that I want to be doing? And it really rang back to what we talked about for ourselves. Like, how do I give an opportunity for my kids where they can live here and not feel like they are having to sacrifice dreams to live in the community that they grew up in? And that kind of really became my passion and really what's fueled a lot of my activity since, I sold in 2020.
And I'm sorry, that was even before here. So I want to back up and hit this because, I did have another mutual friend of ours from our area, and we resonate with the fact that our area, we grew up small town, the opportunities were somewhere else. Mm-hmm. That was just the belief that we got to get out of here, even though in our community there's lots of wealth in the community, but it comes from other places. So we better go to that place in order to do that.
Sure.
And I'd love everyone to hear this is a reversal that most people don't do, which is, wait a minute, how do I actually get people to kind of want to give opportunity for people to stay here in this wonderful community? Because it is a wonderful, listen, I love going back, but still never believed that there was opportunity there. So I want to lean into that a little more about what your mission is now locally.
Yeah, and I can kind of take you through how the path that got me to some of this vision. I mean, I had it in 2020, I saw a need, but it wasn't as broad. So when I sold my company, I worked there for another year, and there's just some things, again, that corporate culture and the operational side of it. This wasn't my company anymore, and I had some leaders that I wanted to grow, and I felt like me being there was kind of keeping them in a small pot. And for them to grow, maybe I needed to get away or give them the bandwidth to have to sink or swim like I did. Yeah. And so I felt like it was a good move to walk away. And when I did, the company said, we bought you for a reason. We want you on the team. And I said, okay, great, but what are you saying? They said, well, we'd like for you to stay. Would you like to stay? I said, what are you proposing? Yeah. And so the long and the short of it was they said, we'd like for you to work with a longtime employee that we have here, and we'd like for you guys to run innovation for the company and look at different things of how we can avert disruption or be a disruptor or look at automation. Or it was a pretty blank slate. Right. So for somebody as entrepreneurial as I am, I was like, why not? At this point, let's do it. It was a little weird traveling at that point in time. You're on a lot of planes with very few people and going places where nobody wanted to be at that point. But it was a lot of fun. And through that, I started reading a lot of books and trying to understand, what does an entrepreneurial ecosystem look like? What does a startup community look like? What does future of work look like? Not only for myself, but also for the company, because we were in the recreational side of the world. So that affects how people use those products. So again, like I told you when I came in, like I like tight concentric circles. That's how I get through my day and cover a lot of ground. So I felt like all the overlap was very beneficial. And through that process, I got to learn a lot about, bigger businesses and how they do innovation, what entrepreneurial systems need to be strong, what communities need to empower entrepreneurs. And in some of the books that I read, this was kind of really the watershed moment. I read a couple of Brad Feld books about startup communities and the startup community way. And in there, the one thing that he talked about that really tripped my trigger and wasn't a light bulb moment, but it was a very reassuring moment, was when he talked about, in order for these communities to thrive, you have to have this word. And the word was topophilia, which is, most people probably don't know what that is, but topophilia means love of place. And I'm like, we've got people that spend millions of dollars on homes to come here 10 weeks a year. They love this place. I know people in our community, our parents and people that love the place. I love the place. So I said, we've got that. And I said, the rest of this, so we've got industry around, we've got proximity, we've got a lot of other things. We don't have mountains and oceans, but we got a lot of lakes in our county, over 100, as you know. And so I was like, we can leverage some of this for the betterment of our community. Nobody's done it. How do you do that? And that's, I kind of started my journey down that path saying, all these people come here. How do we connect with them to create opportunity for the people that live here year round? And, oh, by the way, through COVID, I saw that some of these people like living here and escaping here. And the world is changing enough with autonomous vehicles and remote work and stuff. Can we get them to move here permanently and catalyze our community? So that's a lot of where my work is today.
Wow. And how are you actually doing that? How are you shepherding that?
Yeah, it's not easy, In all of that, we have a lot of people that come to our community and they don't want to be bothered. They're there to get away from the country club or the corporate environment that they're in. They decompress, they bring family, they isolate themselves on the lake and spend all day out there, But I think more and more as I engage with some of these folks, they show their true colors and their love for the community and they want to help. So it's a lot of we're trying to create some different tools of engagement and how we can identify the people that are in our local ecosystem, which isn't easy. We've done a lot of research and looked at different AI tools and ways to quote unquote target or profile the people in our area so that we know how to connect with them. Right. And it's hard in a disparate, makeup because COVID really brought, as you remember from a kid, it seemed like there was a lot of people from Indianapolis that came to the area and some from Chicago, but not that many. But COVID, it was really people were looking for lakefront property anywhere they could get it. So we were bringing people into our community that had no ties ever, which was not as normal as when we were kids.
Right. So putting a word to what organization, how are you doing this? You're not just hanging around and connecting with people. Like, what actually is it that you're driving and pushing that's different in the community? What's the organization?
Yeah, we've got a group called Startup Wawasee that I started, and that was really to just bring some of the entrepreneurial passion to the community. Again, it's something that Brad Feld in his books, talks about, and then he's got this bolder thesis that we try to follow, and it's one of the main things is have a give first mentality, which I really believe in, and I've lived that my life, and that made a lot of sense. And the other part is welcome anybody into the entrepreneurial system that wants to be, that is contributing and actively involved. And it's like, okay, I get that. So let's do that. But let's seek them out. Because it's not like, you're lived in Detroit or a metro area for a long time. It's easier to find some of those people. And in a town like ours, like you said about your dad, he identified maybe more as a business owner than an entrepreneur. So we have to, I hold a weekly lunch, and I've had people stop by that I'm connected to with LinkedIn. They're in the area for whatever reason, and they stop by and engage with us. And it's just one of those things where you have to stay at it. And I'm a big thinker, so it's hard for me to start small because I like to begin with the end in mind. But that's really what you have to do in a rural kind of setting.
Yeah, I think because I do look at the community, those that do thrive in the community. There's plenty of people around, right? It is a rural community, and like our high schools, 3 towns make up our high school, right? I always tell that story of like trying to get people to realize how small.
Sure.
But those that have thrived in that community, again, you said you knew it, right? You grew up, your parents were self-employed.
Sure.
Your friends, the locals that were lucky enough to be on a part of water that leads to the big lake, right?
Sure.
They generally weren't the normal laborer, let's say, right?
Sure.
So those that have been successful and that have stayed there are I believe are business owners. Right?
Yeah.
Again, the ones that are,
Yep.
My friends' parents and those things, again, that are thriving and are able to contribute to the community, not just be a resident, right? And so getting that entrepreneurial spirit back, I mean, even if I'm not mistaken, you're out by 6 and 13, right? State Road 6 and 13 was an innovation park. Were you part of that?
I was not. That was done before. It was kind of crazy because when they started that, they wanted to, it's still to this day called a technology park. There isn't a whole lot of technology in that park.
Yeah.
And at the time that they conceived it, I think they were just ahead of the curve, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the internet and computing power and AI and all that stuff was not a thing. I mean, the internet was a thing, but it wasn't like it is today. And I think it was a good vision, but it didn't have the connectivity that was needed to really pull in the technologically based companies that there is today. And we're fortunate because the area that we are from has a lot of businesses in a few different verticals. You've got a huge ag presence. You've got advanced manufacturing needs all over the place. And then you've got biotech with Warsaw and the orthopedic industry. And the great part of where we're at with technology now is a lot of them need the same things. They need data and analytics. They need sensor technology, all the industry 4.0 stuff. They all need it. Yeah. So that gives us that little leverage to try and solicit some of those startup businesses into the community. You know, part of my goal with Startup Wawasee is to start a localized venture fund that will seed companies that are willing to come to our area. And then the goal is to connect them to the community, customer one and customer two, so that they are sticky to the area but they've got scalable technology that they could maybe turn into, multi-$100 million, $1 billion company.
Right. Because that's really how Warsaw. I mean, right. That's just
exactly
how it started, and now they are the mecca of the world for biomedical, things like that. So that's fantastic. I want to shift now too, because I think there's another tie to, again, I love people that are so closely tied to the community and changing the community. You're also part of another venture that, which used to be a cornerstone of our community, like a lot of golf courses for our small community,
sure.
Right? And one happened to be South Shore, and it was right along the road on 13, and just across the street from the lake. And again, just a great, wonderful place that got left to be weeds.
Yeah.
And so now I know you're part of helping revitalize and do something there. Everyone's always wondered what the heck do we do here, but let's talk about what you're actually trying to provide.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that really was something that came out of, timing, really. At the point in time, I sold my business in 2020, that golf course was for sale. Mm-hmm. That was my first job. That restaurant burnt down in 1991, and I sat across the street on my bike and watched it burn to the ground. My sister had her wedding reception in the pavilion there, so I had ties to it, and fond memories, as did many people. Yep. And so it was tough to see it be for sale, and nobody wanted it at that point in time. Yeah. I mean, golf courses, I heard a statistic in 2019 where 149 were closed in the United States and 3 were built. COVID helped golf quite a bit, and it's come back some since then, but the mechanics of a golf course and the profitability just isn't there to really maintain it in a rural area. We had too many, and it just went out. So also through that period of time, as you know, a lot of the Lakeland Youth Center, which is important to our community, has a lot of good athletic programs, and they rely on the school system for their sporting facilities. And our school district put 5 acres of solar panels where their soccer fields were. Yeah. And so they were in need of getting some land, and that was all at the same time. So this came up for sale, and I didn't really do anything about it when it was up for sale. And some guys came in and bought it and did a 1031 exchange on it and liquidated all the golf course equipment, which pretty much killed any opportunity for that. And we had some community conversations and some people in the room, and another guy and I expressed some interest in buying the buildings that were going to be sold off. And we felt like if we didn't do that it would be very hard to really save anything worthwhile there. And so we bought those buildings and worked on kind of a strategy of maybe we can make it a 9-hole course, or maybe we can do a housing development because we need housing so bad. And didn't really go anywhere in the first year with some of the people that we were working with. And so we decided to take the bull by the horns and did a deal with the guys and got a developer within a week and had things going forward. But like many things do, that fell apart. And it was mostly due to the health of the gentleman that was involved in the development firm. And so we had to pivot again and retrench, and we're still retrenching on the housing part, but we're still pushing along the entrepreneurial piece because we want all this to come together at once, and we want to be able to draw people into the community, and you need both. You need opportunity and you need housing, or it makes it hard to have either one.
Right. And another cool part of it though is the social,
Sure.
Right? Which I think is cool. That not many small communities, right? There's simulators, golf simulators that turn into sports simulation, and it's a bar atmosphere, food, and it's just a great. Not many communities that size get something like that.
Yeah, and we get that a lot. People come in and they're like, "Wow, there's nothing like this around." Like, that was the whole idea. Wanted to be something different because we're a seasonal community. There's a lot of restaurants in the town the size that we have. I counted one time in town, Syracuse. There's 25 places to get a meal. That's a lot for a town of 3,000.
Yeah.
So we didn't really want to even compete with the other restaurants, but it was like, so how do we create something that is more of a total value proposition? So we strategically built it so that we could draw in people of all ages. Thank goodness the state of Indiana finally got wise and loosened up some of their laws for minors and bars.
Oh, yeah.
So you can actually eat in a bar if you're a child today, which when we were growing up, you couldn't do. So some of that really helped, but we've had, really the whole purpose there is to get people together, get people talking like we're talking right now. Because when that happens, then you realize things, differences or opportunities like I did with my family, and it can spur again, opportunity and serendipity can happen, and that's how things move, especially in an area where you could have two people sitting there that don't have any real connectivity. Right. And I've got a really good story on the power of that in our community, if you want to hear it.
Let's have it, man.
So another thing I did when I sold the company was that I was interested in getting involved locally, and whether it was local government or economic development. I'd done that in the county where my business was, but I hadn't done anything where I lived. And, was probably going to be spending the majority of my time. So opportunity to become on my town council popped up, and I thought, wow, I've been thinking about this, and here's an opportunity. So I ran for that position and got it. So I got involved, and one of my main priorities off the bat, because that summer before that, we started having major train derailments all over the country, and they had that big one in East Palestine, Ohio. And as you know, our community is pretty rooted in two lakes that have a lot of expensive homes on them. And there's a railroad bridge between those two lakes that's been falling apart for a long time.
Yeah.
And so my main priority was like, how do we get this thing fixed? And I was lucky enough to be at a Purdue basketball game, and Senator Braun was at the game, and I ran into him and I said, "Hey, Senator Braun, my name's Nathan Scherer. I'm on the Syracuse Town Council, and I was wondering if you might be able to help me with something." And he said, "Hey, what do you need?" And I said, "Well, we've had these train derailments, and I live in a community in northern Indiana that's got a railroad bridge that goes between two lakes. And if that bridge fails and one of those trains falls in the lakes, it's going to be pretty catastrophic for our town." He said, "What town is this?" I said, "Syracuse, Lake Wawasee." He goes, "Oh, geez, I got plenty of friends that are up on that lake." I said, "Great." He said, "What do you want from me?" I said, "All I want is when the time is right, I'd like for you to connect me with Pete Buttigieg, who's the Secretary of Transportation, happened to be mayor of South Bend, which is really our neck of the woods. And I've heard railroads are a little bit difficult to deal with, so I kind of want to be able to use some of his leverage to get a conversation about this." And he said, "Yeah, I can do that. I'll put you in touch with my guy in Washington, and we'll make this happen." And I said, "Great." But I said, "I want to do a little bit of homework on my end." So I went back home and I pulled together all the stakeholders that have vested interest in the lakes, the property owners associations and the conservancy foundations. And I said, "I know you guys have been working on this for a while. What do I need to know?" And through that conversation, we had a lot of back and forth, and this is the engineering studies that have been done, or these are the opportunities or threats or whatever. And through that process, my attorney reached out to me and he said, "Hey, Nate, I want you to know something." He said, "The president of CSX Railroad has a house right up the street."
Oh.
And I said, "Is this like a bank president? Every bank's got one. How much juice does this guy really have?" He goes, I think he's pretty high up there." I said, "What's his name?" He told me his name, and I thought I recognized the name because I know who built his lake house, but I didn't think that he was with CSX.
Yeah.
And this guy used to be the North American president for Ford Motor Company.
Oh, wow.
Lo and behold, he ends up being the chairman and CEO of CSX Railroad.
Oh, jeez.
And he's right down the street.
Yeah.
I thought, well, geez, this got a whole heck of a lot easier.
Yeah.
Well, I shared that with one of the ladies from the Conservancy Foundation, and she said, you're never going to believe this, but he gave us a huge donation last year. I said, this is going to be a piece of cake. You can't donate to the Conservancy of the Lake and not fix the biggest threat to the lake.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we penned a letter and got it to him. He had an engineer out there in 3 weeks, and by August, he had the bridge fixed. But that's the power of the community that we live. We're very fortunate to be from a place that's relatively rural, but has the ability to have people that are leaders of industry come to that lake. And he's not the only one. I mean, Eli Lilly and their family, you know, that, I mean, most people know that name by now, especially with all the GLP-1s and all that stuff. But their family saw value in our area a long time ago. And there's many, many others. And so to me, that really gets my juices flowing from an entrepreneurial perspective and a connectivity perspective to engage those folks for the betterment of our community.
Wow. And it didn't cost the community.
Right.
Right. Because that's not a small chunk.
Right.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thanks for going there.
Yeah.
That's I never even knew that. That's great. I spent many a time going underneath that bridge on someone else's boat.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always like, do we want to wait and go when the train's under? It's like, no, I value my life. I'm not doing that.
Just go.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I'd love to pivot, because I also know, right, the entrepreneurism, there's more to our roles in life. So we took it to entrepreneurism, your roles in the companies. You took it to the role in your community, that you're taking a massive chunk of that, of your life now, is the community portion. Now it's the family side.
Yeah.
And, I know you've also had you have a son.
Yeah.
That's
3 of them.
not traditional. Well, all right, but I'm just saying, I have 4 beautiful children, healthy children, and thankfully, I want this to be heard, all right? I've been healthy and, worry-free. You have had obstacles.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so I'd love to share that.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I'm a faith person, so it's this whole story. I'll try not to get emotional, but it's power of God kind of thing, and I got married in 2006, and we knew that we wanted to have kids pretty quick. And I had a conversation with my dad. I don't even know why we had this conversation, but he said to me, you think you guys will have kids soon? And I said, yeah, I think we're planning on having kids pretty soon. We're both ready, and we want to do that. And I said, I'm a little nervous though. And he looked at me, and I know you don't know my dad real well, but you might have interacted with him a little bit, similar to your dad, not a man of a lot of words and kind of to the point. And I said, I'm a little nervous. And he said, well, what are you nervous about? And I said, well, I don't know how I would be able to handle it if I had a child that had something wrong with them. Mm. He goes, what do you mean? I mean, and he said it like, what do you mean? And I said, I don't know. If they had something wrong, I don't know how I'd be able to handle it. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, I don't know, like Down syndrome or something like that. And he said, it's easy, Nate. Then don't have kids. Mm. And I was like, geez, yeah, that's right there, right? And but I appreciated it, because I was like, yeah, that's the choice you get to have when you're having kids. It's like, you either are going to do it and you're all in, or you're not, or you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, right.
And I really ironically appreciate it. It wasn't what I wanted in the moment. I think I wanted a little bit more encouragement or whatever, but it was like cut and dried, like, then don't do it. Lo and behold, I have a healthy son, and we did lose one between my first and second, and had another child, and very healthy kid. And then my third child, we didn't do genetic testing or anything with any of them, because again, went back to what my dad said, like, I wasn't going to do anything different if a genetic test came back, and I had heard a lot of stories of people that had them and it wasn't what they thought anyway. So it was like, we aren't going to do it. But
you just don't think about it.
Yeah. Huh. And we're going to take what God gives us, and we weren't expecting anything. And my son was getting ready to go home, and the doctor came in white as a ghost, a doctor that we had a strong family relationship with, and things went sideways in a hurry. And they didn't know that he had Down syndrome. They didn't catch any of the markers or anything like that when he was born. And he was starving for oxygen. His O2 levels at that time were about 50%. And they came in and said, hey, he's crashing, and we're going to have to transport him. So that was a tough road. And immediately for me as a provider and a man, I'm thinking about, what does this mean for me long term? What does what does my life look like if I've got somebody that I have to take care of day in and day out? Like, cause I wasn't real well educated on that condition and what that meant for us. And I was scared, and it wrecked me for a number of years. And ironically, the year he was born, my business had just started to recover from 08, 9, 10, and 11. And that business grew 87% that year that my son was born. And I was facing the most difficult thing for me, which is an unknown future and this unknown responsibility and this fear that I talked to my dad about before I had all three of these boys.
Yeah.
But in that, there was a lot of faith, and it was a lot of me knowing that, hey, you've talked about this and you had concerns about this, and you were faithful in these decisions to have kids, and, you know, leave a little room for God in there in this tough moment and let him shine through. And boy, he really did.
Yeah. So, I don't know, keep going, because I know that families can go different directions with all of this, right? What you're going to do with it. And actually, I'll pause and share a little bit of my story. That's not an open story that I generally tell, but you know, it's, in between, we had our first two children, boy and a girl. And I was like, all right, we hit a cycle. I have three sisters. My wife was an only child, and she's like, I want more. And I'm like, and I'm traveling. This is when I was a big corporate American. I was traveling a ton, and I was like, they don't even know my name. I'm come home. I'm exhausted. I don't want to be an asshole dad, right? So I was like, you know what? Let's let this lie, right? A few years pass, and then my wife's grandfather passed, and it was one of those moments where I was like sitting in a church, and I was like, one beautiful soul just left. I think it's time to bring one back. So I went home, and I was like, hon, let's go have another one, right? So I had one, she got pregnant right away, thankfully. And then we got the call. So she was older in age, and we got the call about we should do genetic testing. Okay, so we're like, my wife was, I was, same thing. It's a chance. I didn't ever want to know what the sex was.
Sure.
Let's just see what happens. But this time it was like, again, there was health concerns for her. So we're like, oh, let's make sure we'll do this.
Sure.
Then we get the call, and I don't remember the name anymore, but it was, okay, well, we have markers for her. It's a female, and she has X. And it was a version of that, or a different version of similar to a down, not
a trisomy, probably one of the
not
trisomies.
Quite far down, but
sure.
It was like, well, you've never thought of having to answer this question. It's like, well, you have a choice, right? You could end this, or you could see it through. And to this day, we're very thankful we didn't have to make that. Again, unfortunately, we then actually literally the next day, she had a moment, and actually it passed.
Sure.
So we didn't have to make that choice. And it's one of those things, like, we always, like, my wife's like, what would we have said? Like, because we were scared as hell. We didn't know what, we were scared even, how do we make this choice, or what? We didn't have to, thankfully we didn't have to make it. But again, it's one of those things, like, I know I would have said, we're going through this, right? Yeah. Families do this. It's so, it's okay.
Well, and we had a friend that, had that, and it unfortunately didn't end well, but they were faithful, and it was a decision that they made, and it's hard, especially when you've seen that. I can only imagine what that was for, after going through that with that friend, and then potentially having something similar. I mean, that would be very challenging.
Yeah. That's the human part of, like, I have a choice to, just something, again, it's a power we should not be able to wield, but move forward, right? With your family. I mean, I've seen you've posted continually over the years of the joy.
Oh yeah.
That you've shared with your son and your family, and the inspiration. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, really, right? I mean, and you got to keep in mind that this was something that I was afraid of enough to verbalize with another person before I ever had kids.
Yeah.
And then it's right in my lap.
Yeah.
And ironically, though, that was very comforting, because it was, I mean, I just felt the power of God, and it's like, this is the way it's supposed to be. But in those first 3 years, I mean, there was so much stuff. I mean, my son had chemotherapy at 3 weeks old. I mean, his body was just full of excess cells and all these other things. And he's got a condition that's rare among people with Downs, which is already rare. Yeah. And so it was so much uncertainty. I mean, there was times where I thought he couldn't hear, they might be deaf. Didn't walk till he was 30 months old. So it was just all these things of, like, this heaviness. And my older two were younger at the time. And my wife's like, we should tell them soon, about Parker is my son's name. And we should tell them about Parker. And I was like, why? Let's just let him be their brother as long as possible. And so we agreed that that was the right move. And kind of the point where I started, because he couldn't walk till 30 months, we had to carry him a lot of places, and he got bigger and bigger. But then I started to see him do things and impact people that started to bring my stress and anxiety down a little. We were in, stores or places like that, and I'd be holding them, and all of a sudden he'd almost jump out of my arms for somebody we didn't even know. Yeah. Sometimes these were people that weren't dressed real nice, or that weren't really the type of approachable people, but you would see them smile and you would see them, react to him because he was showing outward love, emotion, which these kids are so typically, a lot of them are very loving and in a way that is so pure and honest that I started to see that shine through him. And I thought, yeah, he can absolutely create value in this world in a way that is profound. And he has. And that was really where I started to let my guard down again on that stress and anxiety. But the other faith thing that came in there for me one day was before, like I said, my kids did not know that Parker had any condition. We hadn't educated on that. And my second son, I think he was 3, maybe 4 years old at the time. One day we were just talking about him, and he said, "Dad," he said, "when Parker's older, he's living with me, right?" And I said, "What?" He said, "He's living with me." And I was like, wow, thank you, God. I don't want to push that on my son, and that's not his responsibility. It's my responsibility, but I hear you. He's going to be okay. Yeah. And that was super powerful for me. And at that point on, it was like, all right, let's focus on getting him everything that he needs so that he can do what he's able to do, which is spread love and joy. And he has. I mean, we've had him in a number of different schools trying to get him what he needs educationally and find the right fit. And but I mean, we just were at a scrimmage game for my son Carson last week, and Parker actually goes to high school. He's in 6th grade, but we don't have a special needs program in our school district. So he goes to the middle school for 2 periods, and then they bus him to the high school, which I was excited about because he was in a Christian school last year, and he had some high school kids in his class, and it went really well. Because Parker's super social. He can be a little hard to understand when he speaks fast, but typically you can understand him really well. And but these 2 little boys that he goes to church with, or he knows them he knows a lot of kids because we had him in north of our town and south of our, he knows a lot of people in between that we don't even know. And these typical kids, they see him, they come up, they start talking to him. They sat beside us for 45 minutes just hanging out. And I thought, how beautiful this is for these boys to have a relationship where it's reciprocal. He's giving them something or they wouldn't stay or even pay attention to him. Yeah. And they're his friends and he talks about them. So I thought, wow, that's really cool.
Let alone what we as society kind of take out of our children is that unbridled joy and, why kids are shy or whatnot, right? Because society has caused that, whether home, whatever it could be, right? And I'm envisioning, and most of like Parker, he doesn't have that, right? He doesn't know what shame is. He doesn't know what, and so when the beauty is when people see that, it makes them feel good, and hopefully it brings that out of them as well.
Well, it does. I mean, I had a situation where I had a close friend who was going through some transition in his life. Had a very lucrative job in an industry in our area and walked away from it and just was not in a real great spot. And he told me one day, he would pick up his kids from school and my wife would pick up our kids and Parker would be with him, and he'd always scream out his name and run and give him a hug. And he's like, "Nate," he said, "that got me through that time." And I was like, wow, that's, again, the power of God. And it's like, that's part of why he's here, to bring light and joy to people's lives. And people that might look at, that's why I always say, when people see Parker's condition, they can see it. It's very visible. And I always feel bad for the people that have kids that look normal but have issues that you can't see, because then those judgments, at least with Parker, people can see and know. But I'm sure there's people out there that look at me in our situation and are like, "Oh, that must suck." And it's the total opposite. I've been humbled and given a sense of apathy that I didn't have before. I know why God gave him to me, and it was because I needed my heart softened a little bit. And he does that for me.
Wow. Thank you. And I was able to keep it together myself. It's just such an amazing story. And more to come.
Yeah.
And I know we could still jam some more, because I love what you're doing for the community that I grew up in, and I essentially went away from, right? because it's still great people there. I have a lot of family still there, so I
Sure.
appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, I
here.
see your sister all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And I do like to ask it at the end here. What is a failure, a mistake, a misstep, something that you've done along the line that was so impactful on you that it can help others?
Woo. Yeah. I mean, hopefully people have, many that they can talk about. I certainly do. I think one of them for me, especially being an entrepreneur, my wife grew up in a business owner family. My father-in-law and her grandfather had a business here in Lafayette. And so because it was a second generation business, it was a little bit different of a lens than what a startup entrepreneur goes through. And I think that I wasn't as sensitive enough, that I should have been more sensitive to that with her. And thankfully, our relationship has stayed strong, even through, having a child with special needs, which can often be divisive.
Yeah.
I think we're stronger now than ever. But I think that was some of it. I was so worried about, especially after Parker was born, like, how do I make a lot of money and how do I put that financial foundation under us so we don't have to worry and make sure that he has all that he needs, which is a lot of stuff. Yeah. And that was a lot of burden. But I think I was so focused on some of those things, I didn't take the time to really step back and engage with my spouse and say, hey, what do you need from me? Ooh. And what is important? Is all of these things is a good trade-off for these things, because we can't have them all. Yeah. And I think for entrepreneurs and people in business, I think that and I know you talk about this a lot of times, I'm sure you do in your coaching all the time, but it's the why. And that why ebbs and flows over time, and there's seasons of life and that why changes. But it's important, I think, sometimes to take the time to step back and check that. I mean, there's a thing that always sticks out to me that you can relate with, and some people maybe that were in our fraternity over time. But there was an article called "Man in the Glass," and it's basically looking yourself in the mirror, and that one's always stuck with me. Do you like the reflection that you see? Are you proud of what you're doing? Are you making impact? You've got to answer to the man in the glass, more or less, and that's one that's always been at the front of my mind. But that's a little selfish. I should have done that about the woman stand beside the man in the glass a little bit and said, what are your needs? And am I fulfilling them? I'm trying to be a provider, but because I'm a man and that's what I know. But do you need emotional support that prior to having Parker, I was pretty hardened about? It was like, your dad and my dad have come from the same era and kind of were the same way. Put your head down and work your ass off.
Yeah, right.
And everything else is somebody else's problem. And I was a little out of touch with that.
Ooh, that's another touch home for so many entrepreneurs. And even like you said, you have to recheck your why throughout time. And, as me, as I'm career-wise thinking, okay, where do I go? What do I do? And it's I'm back in startup mode for myself, right? Worked so hard to put myself out of some work in business, right? Putting people in place. Now it's like, wait a minute, I want to go make an impact as a coach. So I'm hustling again, right? And I'm not home today.
Right.
And how does that impact my wife? And I say, hon, I'm here to support you. I'm here to provide for you.
But I'm gone.
That's the simple, right? That's the simple, you want security, you want financial freedom and all these things. And maybe that was at one point, that's what we were looking for, but now there's a whole different thing. We got to check back in on, I like that, the man in the mirror and the woman standing beside you, right? Oof. So many great bombs today. Thanks, Nate, for coming. How do people help you with connection-wise? How do they get in touch with you to help impact our community, your community, my whole community, and the businesses you're part of?
Yeah, I mean, I like to look at myself as a connector, and I think that's part of the role that I play and but I'm good at spotting opportunities and I'm big on vision. Mm-hmm. So if anybody's excited by any of the things that I've talked about, any of it, reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't even know what my LinkedIn handle is, but it's Nate or Nathan Scherer or something like that on LinkedIn. I've got, email addresses that you can put in the show notes or whatever that people can reach out to me. But I really like that engagement. I like finding people that have passion and figuring out how we can use it for the betterment of other people. I mean, that's really my purpose at this point in life. And, I'd welcome talking to anybody that feels like I can add value or help them some way. I'm wide open.
Love it, Nate. Man, what a great time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the impact you're making in our community and the impact that, because your influence with your family is making on others.
Well, I appreciate that, but I also appreciate you taking the step out and doing these types of things, because this is where it begins for so many. And sometimes you give the opportunity to inspire others, and the domino effects are pretty profound.
Awesome. Love it. Well said. All right, everyone. That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in to The Roll Call with John Glahn. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe for more insightful conversations. Remember, discovering your true role in life is a journey worth exploring each and every day. Until next time, keep defining your path and living your authentic self. This is John Glahn signing off.